This is Jake and Brian on the Hardwood. That is Jake Dale. I am Brian Wilson, and we are here at Fiserv Forum for today's show for National Marquette Day. But yesterday there was a lot of great action in the Big East, and it was on Fox at Madison Square Garden between the number 3 team in the country, the UConn Huskies, and the number 22 team in the land, the St. John's Red Storm. And early in that game, Jake, it was 39-39 notched at the half. And then St. John's started to flex their muscles with Zuby Ejiofor and Bryce Hopkins. St. John's finally started to look the part, the team that we thought they could be going into this season. And Zuby Ejiofor, he can knock them down from downtown now. Why is St. John's dangerous?
Well, he's dangerous because of the guy you just said, Zuby Ejiofor, and also they're finally gelling. I think that we were all waiting for when will St. John's figure it out. It's tough when you bring in a bunch of transfers. Just like when you bring in new freshmen, it takes time to get them used to the program. I'm sure Patino was preaching that all season long, that this takes time. It's not going to be perfect from the jump, but now they're gelling and now they're really clicking. When you beat a team like UConn, that sends a message to the rest of the conference, and a big part of that is Zuby Ejiofor. A lot of people were worried. He looked like he lost a little weight, maybe a little strength, but when you gain a three-point shot, I would argue it's an altogether plus.
Yeah, St. John's able to get the 903rd win in the illustrious career of Rick Pitino. He now passes Roy Williams for 3rd all-time. Pretty good company to be in, only behind Coach K and I think Jim Boeheim. So that's exactly where you want to be as this chase for 1,000 continues.
I will ask you this, Brian. What do we think about the Big East going forward? Does this mean St. John's is the new top dog, or is this just sort of a one-off situation? We know the Big East tournament is played in that same Madison Square Garden, so how will things look come March?
I think it's still a 2-team race between the Huskies and the Johnnies. But when it comes to St. John's, they are clicking, they are playing better, and you don't really look at anybody that could beat them going down the stretch other than maybe UConn when they match up. I think this is a good loss for UConn because you now have an opportunity to bounce back and have a better opportunity to go where you want to go. Sometimes you need a loss to kick it all into gear. But there's another team that's really hot right now that we've been talking about a lot. We've talked off the air, but now we're going to bring that conversation on the air. It has to do with potential #1 pick, Darryn Peterson. We were talking the other night. We were talking about the Boston Celtics, my Boston Celtics, and you brought up that Darryn Peterson could do what Jaylen Brown is doing if you dumped him in to the National Basketball Association right now. The question is, Darryn Peterson has not played a ton of basketball, but when he's in, he's very efficient. He's gotten comparisons to the late great Kobe Bryant, and you see a little the smooth J from MJ in his shot. What makes Darryn Peterson so special, and why you think if you drop him in the NBA right now, he could be a top 3 candidate for the MVP?
Well, I want to talk about his game the other night versus Texas Tech. This is a guy who scores prolifically, one of the best scorers I have ever seen in college basketball. You talk about a guy who doesn't play all that much, and yet he's averaging almost 26 points a game, if not more, for this Kansas team and willing them to wins. But you talk about willing them to wins. He played against a Texas Tech team that made a clear value to stop him early. Grant McCasland made a clear value to stop him early, and it worked. He had 16 points in that last couple minutes going into it. Guess what he did? He tied the game with a 3. He won the game with a 3. The whole time he was stone cold doing it. I'm telling you, this is one of the best players I've ever seen in terms of pure creation, in terms of letting the game come to him and getting his teammates the ball. He really does it all. Maybe the Jaylen Brown comment was out of pocket. I know there are levels to this game, and Darryn Peterson will, like every other rookie, have to learn how the NBA game works because it is a different game. But if I trust anyone to be better than Jaylen Brown at some point, I really trust Darryn Peterson. And honestly, I said that comparison because I see a lot of similarities in their game in terms of offensive creation.
Yeah, both are kind of bigger guards, and that's kind of the way the NBA is going and the way the college game is going. But I do want to talk about that game and on the Kansas side, because you mentioned what Texas Tech did. They did a great job. At one point, they had a 10-point lead. At the end of the day, they were not able to get it done. But they were down Christian Anderson. If you're Kansas, how do you feel that you can go? Because Bill Self, interested to see how this season goes. And we can get into the conversation of Bill Self. Obviously, we hope he's okay. He's had a lot of health implications. Will he step away? That's a conversation we can talk about at the end of the season after the tournament. But when it comes to Kansas, if Darryn Peterson isn't playing a lot, and he's a guy who's very efficient when he does play, other than that Texas Tech game, he's not playing the minutes you would think of a #1 pick. people have compared him to the kind of, does he love basketball like Ben Simmons?
Yep.
I think he likes basketball. It's more of the injuries that are affecting him. But how can Kansas figure out a way to win games shorthanded when Darryn Peterson isn't in there all the time?
Well, truthfully, they kind of have. You know, we talk about that Texas Tech game a little bit. They stuck in there despite Darryn Peterson not being their main go-to guy, despite him not scoring super prolifically. He's been the guy who's been there when they need him, but he's almost been a plus. I think this Kansas team will really excel once they find other ways to win, and they're starting to do that now. I want to ask you more about this tough Big 12, because I think that's what defines this Kansas season, is how well can they play down the stretch of the Big 12. You know Arizona has an insanely tough stretch. How do you feel about some of these Big 12 teams? You talk about BYU, you talk about Houston, you talk about Texas Tech. Tell me a little more.
I think it's a very deep conference. You look, Oklahoma State, huge win over BYU, and that might be a loss that, again, like we've talked about with other teams, maybe BYU needed, because it's one thing when you lose to the top echelon of the conference, and we can argue what is the best conference in the sport. You can say the SEC, you can say the Big 12, you can say the Big 10, but when it comes to true Final Four contenders, all of those reside in the Big 12 conference. And at the end of the day, Arizona, we're going to see if they can get through this stretch pretty much unscathed. And by I say unscathed, 1 or 2 losses, I would say that's probably my favorite to make a run, and not to the Final Four, to go win the national title. But I think it is a lot deeper than in past years. We've seen the year Baylor won, and then Kansas followed their championship up with a win, and we really haven't seen Kansas look like that since. But I do think this is deeper for championships than it has been. And even going deeper, like Oklahoma State, they haven't looked good. They're now 4-5 in conference play. But they have had a good record. If they can continue to rattle off these wins,
and
maybe
real
this is a team.
real bright spots too. I want to ask you more. There are real draft prospects in this Big 12 conference. You look at Kingston Flemings. We talked a little about Darryn Peterson, AJ DeBansa. Who do you like most out of that Big 12 freshman group? And why is it Darryn Peterson?
I do think it's all about fit, if we're being honest, because you look at what are projected the top 4, and 2 of them reside in a game happening today with the best rivalry in college basketball. Duke and Carolina is Cam Boozer and Caleb Wilson. Those are, again, fit, really good prospects. And then you have Darryn Peterson and AJ DeBansa. And we talked about this last show when it comes to AJ DeBansa, where the connection with Danny Ainge and the connection with Ryan Smith, 2 of the biggest guys that are producing money to the NIL collective in Provo, are the owner of the Utah Jazz and the GM of the Utah Jazz. And the GM of the Utah Jazz, former All-Star and Boston Celtic great, and former Boston Celtic GM, where AJ DeBansa is from. But it looks like with the trades they made, they're not going to fit.
Did he go to BYU also?
Yes.
Okay.
DeBansa broke the freshman scoring record in a game that was once set by the one and only Danny Ainge.
Okay.
But with the trade, as again, cutting into the NBA a little, with Jaren Jackson, unless they're truly tanking, probably not going to be a top 3 pick, probably not going to get AJ DeBansa. It's all about fit. And you look at, when we're talking about the NBA draft, this trade deadline, I think, affected a lot of those landing spots, because you look at what Washington did. They're going to be a little better. I think New Orleans is a team that's going to be up there. Sacramento is going to be a team that's up there. And when you look at those teams, it's whoever fits the bill. So it could be Darryn Peterson. It could be Cam Boozer. It could be AJ DeBansa. I don't think Caleb Wilson falls in that category. I think he's a little behind them. It's all, if you're Darryn Peterson, I don't know if you want to go to any of those teams. Sacramento, probably I'd rather go over New Orleans, because
you want to be able to build your own thing, right? You want to be able to have space to do your I get it.
So, but when look at those freshmen, I'm gonna name another guy that you named that I really like. Houston, and that's Kingston Flemings. And the reason I say that is this: Houston is one of the hardest places to play as a freshman under Calvin Sampson. They are a lot about veteran leadership, and they are trusting a freshman to do their billing, and he has been amazing. Came in clutch. He had 40 plus against Texas Tech. They lost, and you know what I like to said about the most about that is I don't care, because
we lost.
It's all about winning. So I think if I had to go with the guy, and he's going to land in a spot where you're like, well, right, he's going to be in the top 5. There's going to, the way this is kind of building, and which was why I brought up the association, is because who's going to fall in those spots, who technically has those picks. The NBA and even the NHL, when it comes to picks compared to Major League Baseball and the NFL, is very different when it comes to how you control picks. And that's going to be a very interesting thing. And that's why I think Kingston Fleming is probably the guy that's going to make the biggest impact in year one because of those tough situations when you start at the top of the draft.
I like that a lot. My only worry about Kingston Fleming is the small guard thing. We talked a lot about AJ DeBenza and Darryn Peterson. That's why they like him so much, is because they like these wing-ish guards. The problem with Kingston Fleming is that he's not big, so it'll be interesting to see the way the NBA goes. We still see small guards exist, but they almost feel like anomalies with the Jaylen Brunsons and the Steph Currys of the world. Moving over, we have another game tonight. We have Michigan State and Illinois in a little bit of Big Ten action. What are your thoughts on both of those teams? Obviously, Michigan State suffered a tough loss to Michigan, and Illinois had a big win over Nebraska. So two teams, interesting passes this season. What do you think?
Yeah, I think both teams are really trying to kind of hit their stride. Illinois, I would say, has.
Yep.
And I think it's been a collective group, and this is the Illinois team that we thought, if they clicked, this is who they can be. When it comes to Michigan State,
and you want to talk about another big guard, Keaton Wagler. Wagler, another big guard. This draft is galore with talent. Sorry, continue.
And he's averaging over 25 points in his last 4 games. He has really came up
unbelievable.
Clutch. But for Michigan State, they've now dropped 2 in a row, and there's an interesting thing this came out of the Minnesota loss. Is Tom Izzo, I think, has been really frustrated with this team, and really they haven't built kind of what we thought they could. We thought this year was going to be different than the past years, and they really can't shoot. The Michigan game, it was a great game, and at the end of the day, it was an offensive struggle, but the team that made the most shots won the game, and that was Michigan. And that's a little rival. It's always been a rivalry, but the Dusty May-Tom Izzo rivalry is something to look out for. But when it comes to this game, talking about the Illini and the Spartans, I think this is the time where Illinois is going to cement themselves as the #1 team in the conference.
All right.
I think they can beat Michigan because they can shoot better than Michigan.
Yeah. Well, we talked about it a little bit too. Michigan State suffers in their offense, and specifically their half-court offense. When they couldn't get things going, I believe it's Jackson Fuller who's their center. When he couldn't shoot, when he couldn't find space in the paint, that meant Jeremy Fears suffered that same thing. Couldn't quite score. Eventually, ended the game with a decent amount of points, but that Michigan State offense looked really, really slow. On the contrary, Illinois' offense has been a barn burner all year.
Yeah, they're unbelievable. They're able to create shots. And the thing is, you brought up Wagler. He really wasn't doing anything early this season, and now he's clicking. He's making big-time plays, and he is the guy that I know that Underwood was like, he's a guy that can be a lottery pick. He's cemented himself with a big run from the Fighting Illini to be a lottery pick, and a guy that's going to probably be in the Koa Pete area of the draft. And there is when you get a team that really isn't that bad, that ends up, because of trades, getting a lottery pick, and he's going to be an instant impact player. And when it comes to lotterying these freshmen, I think what's important to remember, just because you're drafted in the lottery doesn't mean you're going to a bad team. The Boston Celtics, when they drafted Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, they were not bad teams previously. It was thanks to the Paul Pierce trade that they got Brooklyn's picks, and they were able to land those superstars.
And not only were they in the lottery, they were in that top 3, top 2. So incredible stuff. Well, we'll see how it comes come NBA draft time. Super excited for that. Brian, we'd be remiss to not talk about the teams on the court right now. What are your thoughts of both these teams lately, specifically Marquette? Happy National Marquette Day to any of those who observe. What's your kind of thoughts on how Marquette's been playing recently?
I think they've been playing a lot better at home. It really has been. Nigel James Jr., Adrian Stevens is starting to click. Chase Ross is playing better, but the big impact player is the sophomore Royce Barham. Huge impact player, and there's a core that you look at in the years coming up with Adrian Stevens, with potentially Michael Phillips, with Nigel James Jr. and Royce Barham, that can really be a team that Marquette fans can be like, I'm happy to go to games. I want to cheer on this team. And that's what they're building here, and they're building something special. But on the Butler side, it's been really disappointing as of late. Marquette's not been able to win on the road, but since Marquette's lost to Butler on the road, Butler hasn't won. And the guy that's going to need to come up big is the guy who looked like Steph Curry, and that is Finley Bizjack. So how can Finley Bizjack, not just this game alone, but going throughout the season, if they want to make a run in the Big East tournament and put themselves in the conversation, because you have to remember, that Virginia win still looks good on your resume. We know how they can play. How can Butler be a team that can make a run in the Big East tournament? And we know it's led by Finley Bizjack, but how are they going to be able to do that outside of just him?
Yeah, agreed. And I think this is a team that also, you talk about the bright spots a little bit. A lot of people like gripes with Shaka early in the year. You're not able to develop players. You kind of see guys like Caden Hamilton getting a lot of minutes. But you got to give credit where credit is due with how these freshmen look right now and how the sophomores like Royce Parham and Demarius Owens look.
Yeah, I think Demarius got playing time because Zay Lowry no longer with the program.
Yeah.
And I think they're very similar players.
Yeah.
I think Demarius shoots a little better from three, and it seems like they're a little more patient with that. But overall, I think this is a good core, like I mentioned earlier, and it's something that can be built on. And you got to trust the process.
Yep.
Shotgun knows what he's doing, and he mentioned this to me on our interview earlier this season. This is a team and a class that can be one of the better ones that has come through this Marquette program.
Yeah, well, I know you love his philosophy. With the departure of Zay Lowry, they're probably going to dip their feet in the portal. What kind of piece do you think they need to bring in to sort of improve and make that next step into back to tournament relevancy?
I think that has to do with getting a big.
Yeah.
Sheik Peterson, we don't really know. The thought is he can be a guy that can make a big impact, but we haven't seen that. We don't know what Shaka's seen in practice.
Yeah.
And I think it has to be a big. Normally, it's a stretch big that Shaka wants. Those kind of, you see him in the NBA all the time. The guy that can pass the ball all around the court. The guy who can knock down
Pick
from
and pop.
downtown.
Yep.
And then the guy who can hammer down the alley-oop.
Yep.
I don't know if there's going to be. We don't know who's going to be in the portal.
It's tough to find.
So I think that's somebody who you're looking at, kind of like an Oso guy who's made a huge impact for the Suns really this year since the Jordan Ott taking over in Phoenix. That's the kind of guy you're going to be looking for.
Arguably bigger than Tyler Kolek has in New York. Tyler Kolek had his shine definitely towards that midseason
Christmas
tournament.
Day. Tyler Kolek on Christmas Day in
Christmas
MSG.
Day when Tyler saved Christmas. Never forget that. Interesting stuff. I think it's interesting though. You don't want to forget the physicality in a big, and I think that's the one thing you have to watch out for. Is yes, you want that big stretch five, but don't forget when Oso was here, he wasn't a three-point shooter, right? I know you want to find Ben Gold supercharged. I know you want a guy who can stretch the floor and dunk it and put it on the floor, but don't we all, right? But Cam Boozers don't grow on trees, so it's definitely going to be tough to find.
Yeah, I think right before we go, last question for you, Jake, is going into the stretch, only a month left before the Big East tournament, as the Golden Eagles and these Butler Bulldogs will travel east to the Big Apple and Manhattan into the Garden.
Yeah.
What are both of these teams trying to do to improve their chances in seeding? This is why this game's so important. Is Marquette probably can go as high as the 8 or 9 seed, which probably lands you a date with either the Johnnies or the Huskies.
Yep.
Would you rather be the 10? What do you think both these teams need to do to put themselves in the best position to go on a run in the Big East tournament?
Well, my philosophy is always focus on winning, right? You have to focus on the game in front of you and go win. You don't want to get caught up in seeding, but like it or not, you need to win to get that seeding. I think the reality of this Big East conference is it's not as deep as it normally is, right? Like, I like Villanova as much as the next guy. I like Caden Lewis and a lot of what Kevin Willard is building over there, but it's year one, and they're not the perfect team at all. I like St. John's. We talk about that they've been clicking lately, but they're not quite as good as they were last year. They're not dominant. They have a good amount of holes. I like UConn. I think UConn's a really good team. They lost last night, and they can show that they are human and they are real people that aren't perfect. They miss shots, especially when guys like Solo Ball aren't clicking. They're not a perfect offensive team. So all of these teams are beatable. It's about playing good right now.
Yeah, and I would say UConn's one kryptonite is teams that have bigs and physical and don't rely on the three-point ball. Arizona, granted, they didn't have Braylon Mullins and Terrace Reed, went into Gamble and beat the Huskies, and then the loss last night in the Garden to St. John's. That is all from us here on the Hardwood. That's Jake. I'm Brian. For Jake and Brian on the Hardwood, we'll see you later.